you have to have fat and cholesterol, high amounts of fat and cholesterol in your diet. You need to be in ketosis to properly develop your brain and nervous system, because ketones cross the blood-brain barrier. Ketones are from fat oxidation. They're just basically a fuel based on fat, and they cross freely into the brain. They cross the blood-brain barrier, and they act as fuel. And 2/3 of your brain optimally run on ketones. So if you have enough ketones and you have enough glucose, 2/3 of your brain will only run on those ketones. So it's actually a preference. It's only when you start getting less ketones or not enough ketones that you start filling in the gaps with glucose. And so some will still run on glucose, but the majority, including the cortexes, which we do our thinking with, is optimally fueled on ketones. But the ketones also can reconstitute into fatty acids and make up the physical structures of your brain. So when a baby's brain is growing and a child's brain is growing, it's really important for them to get ketones, a lot of ketones, a lot of fat. So a baby in the womb is in ketosis.
Wow. Even
though there are carbohydrates in breast milk, when a baby is breastfeeding, they're in ketosis because it's a lot easier for them to be in ketosis because they need to be in ketosis for their brain. And then we get them onto really high sugar baby food and formula, and actually suppresses the ketones and the ketose, and you're not giving the proper fat.
Dang. So you're not a fan of baby formula?
No.
A lot of parents use that, right?
They do, and sometimes their circumstances require that they do, and that's unfortunate because they don't have the same makeup as breast milk. They have sort of different fats. They say, well, you have to have omega-6s, so you need seed oils like vegetable oils and things like that. Well, vegetable oils do have omega-6s, but they have the wrong omega-6s. We don't need omega-6s. We need arachidonic acid, which is an omega-6. We don't need random omega-3s. We need specific omega-3s, DHA, EPA for our brain. 20% of your brain is DHA. Massive proportion of your brain and your body is made out of fat. And so breast milk is actually the highest concentration of saturated fat and cholesterol of any food in nature. And so why are we scared of this? Why are we saying that this is bad for us? And first of all, that's been completely discredited, that whole cholesterol heart hypothesis. But just looking at what kids need to eat, they need fat and cholesterol. Getting back to your point about cost, it actually ends up being cheaper. So a pound of spinach costs way more than a pound of ground beef, certainly, and it can cost more than many steaks do per pound. And you're not going to get all the nutrition you need from spinach. You will get all the nutrition you need from steak. With that spinach, you're going to need to buy 30 other things. Half of them are going to go bad and spoil before the other ones get used, and so you end up having a lot of waste. Meat, I've really never had to throw out meat. Worst case scenario, give it to my dogs, and they're on a raw meat diet as well.
Nice.
They're healthy as hell.
I just switched my dogs over to that, and
perfect.
Their skin is way better already.
And
they look healthier.
Yeah, and they will be. They absolutely will be, and they'll live longer too, and much more healthfully. And so, I don't have any waste. I've actually saved a lot of money. I'm not buying coffees and snacks and this and that's or whatever. I eat, 2 pounds of meat, and I'm good for 24 hours. It's really convenient too, for people with a busy schedule, because I'm just not hungry. I eat a big meal. I eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good. I can listen to my body's signals. I don't have to figure out with a calculator how much to eat. Like, if you're never going to see a koala pull out a calculator to figure out what to eat, right?
Yeah.
And so if you need a calculator to figure out your macros, you're probably eating the wrong thing.
I was never a fan of that trend. There's apps that do it now. You got to input everything you eat.
Yeah, that's it. Like, where is that in nature? Nature is natural. It has to happen just on its own. And so if we have to figure out something and calculate it, it means we're probably eating the wrong thing, because we should be able to eat intuitively. We should just be able to just eat our natural, biologically appropriate diet and listen to our natural instincts. We're not here from space. We're animals, just like every other animal on this earth. We came from this planet, and those same biological laws apply. No animal in the wild, you don't see like a fat badger waddling around. Oh, that one just doesn't have any self-control. They know what to eat, they know how much to eat, and they know when to stop. And we do too, if we're eating the right thing. And that's a testimony to it being the right thing. If you're just eating fatty meat and you eat until it stops tasting good, your body will perfectly regulate what's coming in and out. And so you don't need to worry about it. And that, I think that is a big testimony to understand that this actually is our biologically appropriate way of eating.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, because you'll never see fat animals in the wild, but you'll see fat dogs, fat cats, fat humans.
Yeah, but only when eating inappropriate diets. Like dogs that are just eating meat. I mean, you put as much meat as you want in your dog's dish, it will eat a certain amount and it will stop.
Really?
Yeah,
you think they'll stop?
Oh yeah, they will.
Wow, I want to test that out, because my dogs be pounding the food I give them.
Yeah, well, maybe they need a bit more. But,
yeah, they might.
but there is a point that they'll stop, and because they know, look in the wild again. Yeah, I mean, you have animals out on pasture, right? You have cows that just live on their own food, and yet they stop sometimes. They monitor how much they're eating. Or actually, they don't have to monitor, but they stop naturally. Koalas, they live in a tree. They have no natural predators. They're just sitting there lazy as a lump, and they're just sitting there just eating leaves, and then they stop, right? They could just keep going, but something in them tells them to stop. Lions, you look at a pride of lions, and king lion, the alpha, gets to, when they make a kill, alpha gets to eat as much as he wants of what he wants, and typically goes for the belly. That's where more fat is. That's like bacon is the belly meat. And there's a lot of fat around the organs. The omentum is nearly completely fat. It's fat around the kidneys. The mesentery, which is the blood supply to the intestines, is completely covered in fat. So there's a lot of fat in the abdomen. And I think that's why they're going for the abdomen, as opposed to, they're getting all the organs. Organs are great. There's a lot of nutrients in them. But they're going for the fat, I believe, because they leave like the haunches, the hindquarters. They're very, very lean. Lions will often leave those and eat the fattier parts of the animal first, unless they're very hungry. And then the hyenas will come in. They'll eat the hindquarters, and their jaws are strong enough to crack open the bones and get at the marrow, which is more fat. And so animals always go for the fat. So king lion goes for the fat, goes for the abdomen, eats as much as he wants. No other animal gets to touch that thing until king lion's done.
Right.
And so they're all just waiting. I've seen videos of these where they're just like impatiently waiting, like, oh my God, I want to get in there. And, daddy lion is just doing his thing. And then all of a sudden he's done. He could, and then the rest of them come in and devour the thing. But he could just keep going until he just made himself sick and was just rolling on the back. Like, oh my God,
Food coma.
Yeah, exactly. But he doesn't, and they don't get fat. It doesn't get overweight. They're ripped. They're like on steroids. And people say, well, they're in the wild. They're really active. I mean, everyone knows that male lions aren't all that active, and but also it doesn't explain animals in the zoo, right? And that's what most people say is that, well, animals in the wild, they're always running around. Well, koalas don't run around anywhere. They're basically sitting there. A lot of animals are just very sedentary, unless they have to be active. And but again, it doesn't explain animals in the zoo that live in a box the size of this room. It's the definition of a sedentary lifestyle. They just sit in an enclosed area and don't go anywhere. And yet, when fed their natural diet, they also look very strong, very muscular, very lean.
Right.
And so that's the thing. If they fed them grains and inappropriate food, they would get fat. But they're not. So being fed the appropriate diet, and even though they're getting no activity, no exercise to speak of, they're extremely muscular and lean and healthy. And so I think that's because of the diet.
Yeah. I don't see too many healthy vegans. The only one I've seen actually is Brian Johnson.
Yeah, well, he takes 160 different supplements, and he has a whole team, spending about $3 million a year keeping him that way. The interesting thing about Brian Johnson is he said that, and he may have changed his opinion on this, but I did hear him say at one point that he wasn't doing the vegan diet because he thought it was the healthiest diet. That was just his choice. That's how he wanted to do it. And so he had his team figure it out. And so it's like, okay, I want to do a vegan diet. I want to do it this way. You figure out how that works. And so that's why he's taking 160 different supplements a day, because you have to. There are essential nutrients that you cannot get from the entire plant kingdom, from the entire fungus kingdom. They just don't exist. B12 is the classic example, but there are more. I mean, you look at, and that's the argument too. You cannot say that humans are herbivores for a lot of reasons, but it just starts and stops at B12. There's no B12 in the plant kingdom. Right? You have to get that from meat. And so we couldn't be herbivores. We couldn't have evolved as herbivores. And we didn't evolve as herbivores. I mean, that's absurd. All the best evidence shows that humans have been apex predators, top of the food chain, which by definition means carnivore, for at least 2 million years, if not longer.
2 million?
Homo habilis, with the onset of the ice ages, 2.5 million years ago, there was this inflection point in early human and then human evolution where people, 8 million years ago or so, we split off from our ancestors who were largely herbivorous. And because they started eating meat, they started eating more and more meat, more and more meat. They started having more genetic adaptations to closer to what we are today, started getting taller, started getting bigger brains because we had to figure out how to get meat. We weren't just naturally predisposed to hunting like a lion, taking things down. We had to scavenge. We had to figure out how we could take a rock and smash open the skull of a dead animal and eat the brains and things like that, and then get sharpened tools. About 3.3 million years ago, we got the first example of a sharpened tool that we can now use to cleave and cut off meat off the bone. And we see butcher marks, very classic, clear signs of butchery on bones around that time and beyond, showing that this was intentional butchering and carving and ripping off meat with these stone tools that were again found in that area. And you can see the deposits in those cut marks in the bones that came from that flint axe over there. And so we have very good information about this. So our brains were growing, our jaws were getting smaller, teeth were getting smaller because we're eating softer and softer foods. We're not chewing on sticks all day like a gorilla, right? And so we had these adaptations. Then about 2.5 million years ago, the ice ages started. We didn't actually have polar ice caps 2.5 million years ago or so. When the ice ages started, we're in an ice age. We're sort of in an ebb of an ice age. When that ice shelf started coming down, obviously ice kills things, and it stops, kills animals and plants and things like that were surviving in the area, and animals had to specially adapt or die out. And our ancestors in Homo habilis did, and the adaptation that they had was they were able to turn to full carnivore apex predators. So they weren't just scavenging now and then getting a kill every now and then. Now they had the technology and the brain power and the tactics to be able to take down large animals and get the whole animal. You can get the organs, you can get the meat, you can get all the fat. You weren't just getting the scraps.
Right.
And there's an inflection point in our evolution at that point. So our height and brain size was coming up steadily over millions of years since our ancestors started eating meat. Then about 2.5 million years ago, bam! It's just an exponential increase in brain capacity, and cranial capacity, and height. Up until about 15,000 years ago, it's going up and up and up and up and up, and then bang, straight down. And anthropologists and paleoanthropologists show that in the fossil record, there's a clear point right at the point of the agricultural revolution. And this isn't just in all over the world this happened. This happened when a society went from pre-agriculture to post-agriculture, starting about 10,000 years ago. But at other points in time, people have come across agriculture or been introduced to agriculture, and you see the exact same thing. And as, I'm going to butcher his name, but it's Professor Ulajacic from Oxford. I can get it spelled for you if you like, but
I'm good on that.
Yeah, but he said that starting about 10,000 years ago, you saw a clear, distinct line in pre and post agriculture that the same thing occurred regardless of the time, regardless of location, and regardless of the type of crop that they moved to. The same things happened. The height, health, and health of the population declined. And they said there's all these signs of malnutrition, infectious disease, and all these other things that came on afterwards. The jaws got smaller, started getting crooked teeth, fallen dental arches. Weston A. Price was a dentist 100 years ago. He showed this in these native populations. They had perfect teeth, perfect dental arches, until they started eating Western food and didn't get enough fatty meat. And specifically, he found that it was the fat-soluble vitamins that you needed to develop your hard palate and your dental arches and jaw. And in the same families, all of a sudden, Johnny starts eating this other stupid food that come in from the towns and has screwed up teeth.
Wow.
And then they can reverse that by giving them fatty meat and whole milk and things like that. And then the next generations, they could get the teeth back, things like that. But we saw that you can tell the difference between a pre-agricultural and post-agricultural skeleton and teeth, especially because of that.
Dang.
And the brains went down. So after agriculture, the adult male brain capacity reduced by 11%. Female adult brain capacity went down by 17%. and the average height went down by about 5 inches.
Holy crap.
And so that wasn't over hundreds of years or thousands of years. That wasn't an adaptation process. That was overnight in the fossil record. So that happened immediately. And that's persisted until today. And we saw this in real time, again, with the Native Americans, the Native Canadians, the Native Australians, and we're seeing it in the Maasai as well, who are traditionally carnivores. They have a large portion of that carnivore diet being milk, but milk, blood, and meat is their staple diet. And they started introducing some plants throughout the 20th century, and they started getting some of these human diseases throughout the 20th century as well. Now they have Coca-Cola trucks going to the Masai Mara and these little villages, and they sell out very quickly because they don't know how harmful this stuff is. And now their diabetes is actually going up, and their tooth decay is going up, and their chronic diseases are going up, even though traditionally they're extremely healthy. So now they're seeing that inflection point that anthropologists talk about, that they go from this just injuries and infectious disease, and actually pretty low infectious disease rate. There's a study out of the British did in the 1920s and early 30s. They're actually extremely healthy. They had very low rates of like almost no chronic disease and very low infectious disease rates as well. And they were much taller, stronger, healthier, had more lean body mass than their neighbors, the Akikuyu, who they interbred for who knows how many hundreds of years or thousands of years. So they're a genetically similar population. And the Akikuyu were largely vegetarian. And they were just growing their own crops. But this is out in the middle of Africa. They're not in cities. They don't have pollution. They don't have commercial agriculture and pesticides and fertilizers. It's just living out on a commune, growing grains and things like that. They were much less healthy. The Maasai were 5 inches taller on average, 23 pounds heavier, of lean body mass, stick skinny, just really, really svelte people, and 50% stronger. And they didn't have any of these chronic disease issues that the Akikuyu had, who also had a lot of nutritional deficiencies. The British started supplementing them with the different nutrients that they were lacking, and it didn't actually make them healthier. It wasn't until they replaced the plants they were eating with meat that they got healthier. Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. There was no mention of heart disease anywhere in that study with the Maasai in the 1920s, and yet in the 1970s you start seeing, there's a bit of it there. But I know people that have volunteered in Africa in the 80s, and they were like, that was never anything we treated. We never treated these chronic diseases. It was always different things. Now you're seeing it. You're seeing it show up more. Now you're seeing diabetes, which if you have diabetes, it increases your risk of developing cardiovascular disease by 1,000%, right? And metabolic syndrome will increase it by 600%. And so those are major risk factors. Those metabolic issues are major risk factors for all these chronic diseases. And now we're starting to see those in the Maasai, and we saw those. And those disparities between the Maasai and the Akikuyu, exactly the same disparities that we saw pre and post agriculture in the fossil record. And the Native Americans, like especially in the Great Plains, there was a study in 2001 that was just called Tallest in the World, and they looked at records from the late 1800s with the Plains Indians in the Great Plains that were largely just eating buffalo and bison. And then they found that they were the tallest human beings alive on Earth at the time. They were far taller than the Europeans, 5-6 inches or more taller on average. And there's sort of an average between them. Some were, ranging from like 5'6" to 5'10" on average. But the Cheyenne were about 5'10" on average, adult male height. And now in America, last I checked, it was 5'8". So it's still taller than people here today. But they were far taller than people at the time, which is much lower, more like 5'3", 5'4". And so they were much taller. And that was at the end of the 1800s, after they'd killed all the bison and put them on the reservations. That's a really interesting thing. So they were still taller than everybody else, even though they had started transitioning onto a more Western diet and started getting sicker and started having that their height come down. And in those studies and measurements, they said that the older generations were far taller than the younger generations. And so if they just looked at the older generations, or maybe looked 100 years back, the average height would have been much, much taller. And in fact, we see the fossil record of people going back tens of thousands of years who, back before the megafauna died out because we were eating mammoth, that the big mammoth hunters, that some of these people were on average 6'2" to 6'4". Average.
That's crazy.
Right? And so, I'm 6'3", I would be average. You'd probably be,
slightly above.
Slight above that. But, everyone would be,
That's so wild.
It would just be, a population of, NBA players and things like that.
Yeah, eating a mammoth. Damn.
Eating mammoth.
So why do you think Asian people are so short?
Well, a lot of it's going to be because of diet as well. You look at the Mongols. Well, you look at more recently. There's been a lot of famines in the 20th century as well, with Mao and the forced famines and poverty and things like that. And of course, if you're not getting adequate nutrition during development, you're not going to grow as tall as you possibly could. Mm-hmm. And we see that all over the place, which is why I think it's a crime against humanity to be putting kids on vegetarian diets or these processed food diets and formulas and things like that, and vilifying meat and say no, it's bad. Putting 5-year-olds on statins. Are you out of your mind? I mean, but people are talking about that you should put kids on statins. Wow. if their cholesterol is high. It needs to be high. Their brain needs it to be high. Their body needs it to be high. And it's good for you. All your hormones are made out of cholesterol, or your steroid hormones are made out of cholesterol. Vitamin D is made out of cholesterol. So if you're not giving kids adequate nutrition, they're not going to develop properly. And so you've had a lot of forced famines and poverty throughout the last century in China and elsewhere, and people are going to be shorter as a result of that. Then you see people. I've known many friends that were first generation American, and their parents are these wizened little old Chinese people. Right. They're 6'4", just ripped.
Yeah, that happened to me.
Yeah,
my grandparents were super short.
There you go. Yeah, so I think a lot of that's nutritional, and I think that there's a stark contrast, specifically because of the malnutrition that was prevalent in the 20th century for various reasons. Look at Genghis Khan, the Mongol horde. They were carnivores. They ate horse meat. They drank horse blood and fermented mare's milk. Very lactose intolerant. It had to be fermented, and still to this day persistently lactose intolerant. Some of the more lactose intolerant people in the world as a population, and yet they have a lot of fermented dairy, but they can't do the lactose. And they obviously carved out the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed on Earth. And you read histories about Genghis Khan and the Mongols, and a large portion of that success was attributed to their diet. They're extremely well fed. Even the most base fighter in the Mongol horde had a lot of access to meat and high protein and nutritious food, while they were fighting against these peasant armies that were just already subjugated. They were just eating a bunch of gruel. They had a lot of health issues, and they were just weaker and more frail and just malnourished. And they actually attribute a lot of their success to how healthy the Mongol people were, because they were eating such good food.
Wow.
It also was an advantage because they didn't have to cook 3 times a day. So they didn't have to stop their armies, and they didn't have all these cook fires going up. And so you can track an army in the horizon by the smoke that's coming up. Like, oh, okay, see how fast those smoke clouds are moving. They're going to be here in 3 days. Okay, we have 3 days to prepare. You didn't have that with the Mongols. They just showed up out of nowhere.
So they were eating raw meat?
They would eat raw meat. They could cook it as well. They would, people always saying about, how you have to, there's a thing now in Australia where they're telling, parents not to put lunch meat in their kids' sandwiches because, we don't have refrigeration. So it could be like 3 hours before you just rot and go to hell. I'm like, you out of your mind? Like no one's ever brought a sandwich to school or work before. Yeah. It's like, this is the first time this has ever happened. The Mongols would take a raw piece of meat and put it under their saddle and ride on it for several days to tenderize it.
Wow.
And then they'd eat it.
That's savage.
And they could go 5 days without eating.
Jeez.
Eat 10 pounds of horse meat and then ravage the countryside for another 5 days and do it again. And they could drink blood as well. The Maasai drink blood, and they just sort of pop a little hole in a vein and drain some blood, and they drink that. And it keeps you going. It's amazing nutrition, and it's a renewable resource as well. They're eating grass, they're turning it into blood. You're drinking the blood, and you just keep going. It's like milking them, and you do it in a rotation, so you're not overdoing it. But It works very well, and they were much taller and healthier and more robust as well. And so it's I think you'll find that in populations, any population, you go back to eating that way, the kids will be taller and smarter and have bigger brains. We saw this in cats. There's a very famous doctor named Dr. Pottinger, and Dr. Price I mentioned before. There's an organization called the Price Pottinger Foundation, carrying on his works. And Pottinger is this other guy, Dr. Pottinger, who randomly was my mom's doctor as a kid in California at one point, and said, you need to feed, I don't remember the health issues she was having at the time, basically said she needs to eat raw meat and or raw liver. And every day she had to have some raw liver every single day, and actually sorted out her issues.
Wow.
And he did a study with cats for several years, many years, probably 14 or some years, and looking at nutrition, because they were studying tuberculosis, and he thought that tuberculosis had something to do with the adrenals. In fact, it has to do with diet. Pre and post agriculture, pre-agriculture, you don't see any signs of tuberculosis infections. Post agriculture, immediately you saw signs of tuberculosis in the spine of the fossils and things like that. And then Dr. J. Salisbury, who was a New York doctor in the 1800s, did a 30-year research project into the optimal diet for human beings. Was living with the Native Americans, seeing they were just really healthy with just eating meat. They were living to be 110, 115 years old. And it's like, well, that's far-fetched. And I was like, well, actually, it's not, because I was taught in genetics class 20 plus years ago that we are designed based on the length of our telomeres and our chromosomes. Genetically, we're designed to live 120 years on average. So people actually just living to be 115, 120 years old, that's actually normal. That should be how long we live. But we're dying in our 60s and 70s and 80s and calling that a good life because we're sickening ourselves for decades and eating these low-grade poison and not getting proper nutrition, and our bodies are just failing 40 years early, 50 years early sometimes. So he was looking at, and Salisbury actually found that when you put people on just a pure red meat and water, this is long before processed food and garbage, you cut out the grains and the vegetables and just eat red meat and water, he could reverse autoimmunity like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's, reverse gout, and even tuberculosis. He was actually finding that he was getting people healing from tuberculosis, which was a major killer back then, by putting them on a pure red meat and water diet. And so Pottinger was looking at the adrenals. And so he was doing an adrenalectomy, which they took out the adrenal glands from these cats, and we're going to expose them to TB and sort of see what happened. But all the cats were dying. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. And so he couldn't figure out what was going on. People were sort of passing in strays before they were all spayed, neutered animals back then. So there was a lot of strays. So they're getting like a lot of cats, more cats than they knew what to do with. And they sort of had more than they needed. Mostly they were cooking the meat and giving it to the cats. They're still just giving it meat, but they were cooking it. And then they sort of, just sort of for time management, they're like, all right, well, we have too many cats. We'll cook as much as we can, but then we'll give just raw meat to the rest of them. Mm-hmm. The raw meat ones all survived. All the cooked meat ones died. Raw meat ones lived. And they're like, okay, well, what the hell is going on? And they switched the focus of his research to, okay, what nutrients are you losing something when you cook meat? And they found that yes, you do. You lose taurine, you lose glutamine, you lose other sorts of things. And taurine is essential to cats. And so they have to have raw meat. Mm-hmm. And so they looked at it and they found that the raw meat group, there's a lot to this, but I'll paraphrase and get to the high notes. The raw meat group was extremely healthy, generation after generation after generation. Big, strong animals, perfectly formed cheekbones, big brains for a cat, and proper bone density, all that sort of stuff. And the cooked meat cats, same meat, it's just cooked, were much less healthy. And the next generation, they were smaller. They weighed less. They had like about half the bone density. Their brains were smaller. Their cheekbones weren't as developed. And they weren't as interested in play. They weren't as interested in mating. The next generation, They were even sicker, even smaller, less developed facial structures, even smaller brain. And their bones were so soft because they only had about 3% bone mineralization. Same amount of calcium. The calcium doesn't cook out. But because of how this changed the nutrients and how their body processed these nutrients, their bone mineralization was down around 3%.
Wow.
And so their bones, they said, were so soft and flexible, it was like foam rubber. And so they could have dozens of fractures. And they were sterile at that point. They couldn't have babies. They weren't even interested in mating, really. But the ones who sort of did mate couldn't get pregnant, or the few that did get pregnant had stillbirths.
Wow.
So they couldn't make it past the third generation on cooked meat. And then they switched them to raw meat, and they got healthy again. Now, they didn't grow after that because their growth plates were already closed. So it'd be like your grandparents, and come to an area that had more access to food. They are much more healthy, but they're done growing at that point. But their kids could benefit from that. And so the cats were able to reproduce. And you'd think, well, the next generation, they'll just be back and normal again. No, it took 4 generations to breed back to where the raw meat cats were.
Damn.
So there's this multi-generational epigenetic knock-on effect that happens when you aren't as healthy as you could be. So it's actually a big impact. So, you're going to be a lot taller than your parents and your grandparents. And if you eat properly, your kids are going to be even bigger, taller, smarter, and stronger. Their kids are going to be even better as well. And we're just going to get taller and taller and taller and better and better. Genetically, I should be 6'7", 6'8". My grandfather on my father's side, he and all his brothers were pushing 7 feet tall.
Wow.
And my dad and his brothers are all from between 6'4" and 6'7".
So something happened there.
Yeah. Me and my brothers, 5'10", 6'3", and 6'4". So just 3 generations, we've just gone a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter and a little bit shorter. And so why the hell is that? Well, we had this big plant-based push throughout the 20th century. When my dad was a young man, they started pushing this whole cholesterol heart hypothesis. You shouldn't eat fatty meat, all that sort of stuff. And so he, took that very seriously, and we ate meat, but we trimmed off all the fat, and we had, like whole grains and all that sort of, and milk and skim milk and grains. So we were just eating the fatty pig diet, to like fatten up pigs in the 1930s. That's what we grew up on.
Dang.
He was he read Dr. Pritikin's book, which was all about just eating basically no meat, but certainly no fat, and how important that was. And so that's how we grew up. And my little brother really wasn't a fan of meat. He mostly ate white rice with tempura sauce. That was all we could get him to eat as a kid.
Jeez.
And he's 5'10". I'm 6'3". My brother is 6'4". And when I was 18, I wrestled at 215 pound weight class. My little brother was 148 weight class.
Holy crap.
Yeah, big difference.
Huge.
Yeah, and I always loved meat. I always wanted to eat a lot of meat. I also didn't have braces. Neither did my brother or my sister. One of my sisters who decided she wanted to go vegetarian as a teenager, and my younger brother who basically just didn't eat enough and just ate a bunch of rice. They were the only 2 people in my family that needed braces.
Wow.
And now we know in the dentistry journals that crooked teeth are not genetic. It is developmental and mostly nutritional. And also, if you're chewing on soft foods, you're not stimulating your hard palate and your jaw to grow properly.
Right.
So you need to be chewing on, not sticks like a gorilla, but something firm enough to trigger that growth response, which is meat.
Nice ribeye.
Yeah, and get the fat soluble nutrients that you need, which are really important.